Chapter 16 of the Anarchist FAQ Appendix. How does the development of the collectives indicate the differences between Bolshevism and anarchism? As argued in the last section, the collectives formed during the Spanish Revolution reflected certain aspects of anarchist theory but not others. They were a compromise solution brought upon by the development of the revolution and did not, as such, reflect CNT or anarchist theory or vision, bar being self-managed by their workers. The militants of the CNT and FAI tried to convince their members to federate together and truly socialize the economy with varying degrees of success. A similar process occurred during the Russian Revolution of 1917. Their workers created factory committees which tried to introduce worker self-management of production. The differences in outcome in these two experiences and the actions of the Bolsheviks and anarchists indicate well the fundamental differences between the two philosophies. In this section, we discuss the contrasting solutions pursued by the CNT and the Bolsheviks in their respective revolutions. The simple fact is that revolutions are complex and dynamic processes which involve many contradictory developments. The question is, how do you push them forward, either from below or from above? Both the Spanish and the Russian Revolution were marked by localism, when the workers in a factory considered it their own property and ignored wider issues and organization. Lenin and the Bolsheviks solved the problem of localism by eliminating workers' self-management in favor of one-man management appointed from above. Attempts by the workers and factory committees themselves to combat localism were stopped by the Bolshevik-dominated trade unions, which prevented the convocation of a planned all-Russian Congress of factory committees. In November 1917, when called upon by the Bolsheviks to render a special serve to the nascent Soviet state and to discipline the factory committees. The Deutscher quoted by Maurice Brinton, the Bolsheviks and worker control. Instead, the Bolsheviks built from the top down their system of unified administration, based upon converting the Tsarist system of central bodies which government and regulated certain industries during the war. The CNT, in comparison, tried to solve the problem of localism by a process of discussion and debate from below. Both were aware of the fact that the revolution was progressing in ways different from their desired goal, but their solution reflected their different policies. Libertarian in the case of the CNT, authoritarian in the case of Bolshevism. Therefore, the actual economic aspect of the Spanish Revolution reflected the various degrees of political development in each workplace and industry. Some industries socialized according to the CNT's pre-war vision of libertarian communism. Others remained at the level of self-managed workplaces, in spite of the theories of union and anarchists. This was the case with other aspects of the collectives. As Vernon Richards points out, in some factories the profits or income were shared out among workers. As a result, wages fluctuated in different factories and even within the same industry. But fortunately, the industries of this form of collectivization was recognized and combated by the CNT syndicates from the beginning. Lessons of the Spanish Revolution. Thus, the collectives, rather than expressing the economic vision of communist anarchism or anarcho-syndicalism, came into existence precisely because the CNT was unable to carry out its libertarian communist program, which would have required setting up a workers' congress and coordinating councils to establish common ownership and society-wide self-management. To assert that the collectives were an exact reflection of anarchist or anarcho-syndicalist theory is therefore incorrect. Rather, they reflected certain aspects of that theory, such as workers' self-management in the workplace place, while others, industrial federations, to coordinate economic activity, for example, were only partially met. This, we must stress, is to be expected, as a revolution is a process and not an event, as Kropotkin can argue. It is a whole insurrectionary period of 3, 4, perhaps 5 years that we must traverse to accomplish our revolution in the property system and in social organization, from words of Rome. Thus, the divergence of the actual revolution from the program of the CNT was to be expected, and so did not represent a failure or a feature of anarchist or anarcho-syndicalist theory, as Morrow and other Marxists assert. Rather, it expresses the nature of a social revolution, a movement from below which, by its very nature, reflects real needs and problems and subjects to change by discussion and debate. Bakunin's comments stress the aspects of this revolution. I do not say that the peasants and workers, freely organized from the bottom up, will miraculously create an ideal organization, conforming in all respects to our traits, but I am convinced that what they construct will be living and vibrant, 1,000 times better and more than any existing organization. Moreover, this organization, being on the one hand open to revolutionary propaganda, and on the other not petrified by the intervention of the state, will develop and perfect itself through free experimentation as fully as one can reasonably expect in our times. The abolition of the state, the spontaneous self-organization of popular life, will revert to the communes, and the development of each commune will take its point of departure, the actual condition of its civilization. Bakunin on anarchism. To impose an ideal solution would destroy revolution. The actions and decisions, including what others may consider mistakes, of a free people are infinitely more productive and useful than the decisions and decrees of the vast central committee. Moreover, a centralized system by necessity is an important system, as it excludes by its very nature the participation of the mass of the people in determining their own fate. As Bakunin argued, collectivism could be imposed only on slaves, and this kind of collectivism would then be the negation of humanity. In a free community, collectivism can come about only through the pressure of circumstances, not by imposition from above, but by free spontaneous movement from below. Thus, socialization must proceed from below, reflecting the real development and desires of those involved. To speed up the process by centralization can only result in replacing socialization with nationalization and the elimination of workers' self-management with hierarchical management. Workers, again, would be reduced to the level of order takers, with control over their work resting not in their hands but in those of the state. Lenin argued that communism requires and presupposes the greatest possible centralization of large-scale production throughout the country. The all-Russian Center, therefore, should definitely be given the right of direct control over all the enterprises of the given branch of industry. The regional centers define their functions depending on local condition of life, in accordance with the general production directions and decisions of the center. He continued by explicitly arguing that to deprive the all-Russian center of the right to direct control over the enterprise of the given industry would be regional anarcho-syndicalism and not communism. Marx, Engels, and Lenin, anarchism and anarcho-syndicalism. We expect that Morrow would subscribe to the solution to the problem of social revolution generates. However, such a system has its own problems. First is the basic fallacy that the center will not start to view the whole economy as its property. Being centralized, such a body would be difficult to effectively control. Indeed, Stalin's power was derived from the state bureaucracy which ran the economy in its own interest. Not that it suddenly arose with Stalin, it was a feature of the Soviet system from the start. Samuel Farber, for example, notes that in practice the hypocentralization pursued by the Bolsheviks from early 1918 onwards turned into infighting and scrambles for control among competing bureaucracies. And he points to the not untypical example of a small condensed milk plant with fewer than 15 workers that became the object of a drawn-out competition among 6 organizations, including the Supreme Council of National Economy, the Council of the People's Commissary of the Northern Region, and the Vologda Council of People's Commissars and the Petrograd Food Commissar. In other words, centralized bodies are not immune to viewing resources as their own property and compared to an individual workplace. The state's power to enforce its viewpoint against the rest of society is considerably stronger. Secondly, to eliminate the danger of workers' self-management generating proprietarian notions, the workers have to have their control over their workplace reduced, if not eliminated. This, by necessity, generates bourgeois social relationships and, equally, appointment of managers from above, which the Bolsheviks did embrace. Indeed, by 1920, Lenin was boasted that in 1918, he had pointed out the necessity of recognizing the dictatorial authority of a single individual for the pursuit of carrying out the Soviet idea, and even claimed that at that stage, there were no disputes in connection with the question of a one-man management, quoted by Brenton. When the first claim is true, Lenin argued for one-man management appointed from above before the start of the Civil War in May 1918. The latter one is not true. Excluding anarchists and anarcho-syndicalists, there was also the dissent of left communists in the Bolshevik Party itself. Thirdly, a centralized body effectively excludes the mass participation of the mass of workers. Power rests in the hands of a few people, which, by its nature, generates bureaucratic rule. This can be seen from the example of Lenin's Russia. The central bodies the Bolsheviks created had little knowledge of the local situation and often gave orders that contradicted each other or had little bearing to reality. So encouraging factories to ignore the center, in other words, the government's attempts to centralize, actually led to localism, as well as economic mismanagement. Perhaps this is what Green means when he argues for a new centralism, which would be compatible with and requiring the initiative of the workers at the base. That is, the initiative of the workers to ignore the central bodies and keep the economy going, in spite of the new centralism. The simple fact is, a socialist society must be created from below, by the working class itself. If the workers do not know how to create the necessary conditions for a socialist organization of labor, no one else can do it for them or compel them to do it. If the state is used to combat localism and such things, then it obviously cannot be in the hands of the workers themselves. Socialism can only be created by the workers' own actions and organizations, therefore it will not be set up at all. Something else will, namely state capitalism. Thus, a close look at Lenin's solution indicates that Trotskyists claim that their state is the tool of the majority in the fight against exploitation by the few. To use John Green's words, is refuted by the assertion that the state will also bring the economy under centralized control, and by the actions of the Bolsheviks themselves. Why is this? Simply because if the massive collectives are not interested in equality and mutual aid in society as a whole, then how can the government actually be the tool of the majority when it imposes such mutual aid and equality upon the collectives? In other words, the interests of the government replace those of the majority. After all, if workers did favor mutual aid and equality, then they would federate themselves to achieve it, which the collectives were actually doing all across Spain, we must note. If they do not do this, then how can the worker state be said to be simply their tool when it has to impose the appropriate economic structure upon them? The government is elected by the whole people, so it will be claimed, and so it must be their tool. This is obviously flawed. If, argued Malatesta, you consider these worthy electors as unable to look after their own interests themselves, how is it that they will know how to choose for themselves the shepherds who must guide them? And how will they be able to solve this problem of social alchemy, of producing a genius from the vote of a mass of fools? And what will happen to the minorities, which are still the most intelligent, most active, and radical part of the society? Malatesta on anarchy. And what does all this mean? Simply that Trotskyists recognize, implicitly at least, that the worker state is not in fact the simple tool of the workers. Rather, it is the means by which socialism will be imposed upon the workers of the party. If workers do not practice mutual aid and federation in their day-to-day running of their lives, then how can the state impose it if it is simply their tool? It suggests what is desired by the working people as a whole, merely a euphemism for the party and Trotskyist ideology, is different than what they actually want, as expressed by their action. In other words, a conflict exists between the workers and the so-called worker state. In Russia, the party imposed its concept of the interests of the working class, even against the working class itself. Rather than indicate some kind of failure of anarchist theory, the experience of worker self-management in both Spain and Russia indicate the authoritarian core of Trotskyist ideology. If workers do not practice mutual aid or federation, then a state claiming to represent them, to be simply their tool, cannot force them to do so without exposing itself of being an alien body with power over the workers. For these reasons, Bakunin was correct to argue that anarchists have no faith except in freedom. Both Marxists and anarchists equally supporters of a science which is to destroy superstition and replace belief, differing the former wishes to impose it and the latter striving to propagate it. So human groups, convinced of its truth, may organize and federate spontaneously, freely from the bottom up, with their own momentum, according to their real interests, but never according to any plan laid down in advance and imposed upon the ignorant masses by some superior intellects. Anarchists, he continues, think that there is much more practical and intellectual common sense in the instinctive aspirations and in the real needs of the masses of the people than in the profound intelligence of all these doctors and teachers of mankind who, after so many fruitless attempts to make humanity happy, still aspire to add their own efforts. Michael Bakunin, Select Writings. In summary, the problem of localism and other problems faced by a social revolution will be solved in the interests of the working class. Only if working people solve them themselves. For this to happen, it requires working class people to manage their own affairs directly, and that implies self-managed organizing from the bottom up, anarchism, rather than delegating power to a minority at the top, to a revolutionary party or government. And this applies economically, socially, and politically. As Bakunin argued, the revolution should not only be made for the people's sake, it should also be made by the people. No gods, no masters. Thus, the actual experience of the collectives and their development, rather than refuting anarchism, indicates well that it is the only real form of socialism. Attempts to nationalize the means of production inevitably disempower workers and eliminate meaningful worker self-management or control. It does not eliminate wage labor, but rather changes the name of the boss. Socialism can only be built from below. If it is not, as the Russian experience indicated, then state capitalism will be the inevitable outcome.